Coming up on Network Africa today, Nigeria's Supreme Court affirms the election of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu following the dismissal of the appeal filed by opposition party candidates. Sudan Army and Rapid Support Forces resume peace talks in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi says Palestinians leaving Gaza is not a solution to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Welcome to the program. I'm Anne Nwawado. We begin here in Nigeria, where the election of President Bola Tinubu has been affirmed by the highest court in the country. This follows the dismissal of the appeals filed by opposition parties, Labour Party and the People's Democratic Party, and their candidates challenging the judgment of the Presidential Election Petition Court for lacking in merit. But the lead judgment was read by Justice John Okoro and supported by Justices Garba Lawal, Uwani Abba Aji, Ibrahim Salawa, Adamu Jauro, Tijani Abubakar and Emmanuel Agim. The justices contended that the candidate does not need to get at least 25% of the votes from the FCT to be declared as the country's president. The court had earlier dismissed Mr. Tiku's application to file new evidence for his appeal on the ground that the 180 days provided by the Constitution for admission of fresh evidence had lapsed. But none of the candidates were in the court. Their lawyers and party chieftains were all in court.
3/7/2023, Mr. Peter.
Meanwhile, President Bola Tinubu has hailed the Supreme Court's verdict on the presidential election petitions filed by the candidates of the two opposition parties, challenging the ruling of the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal. President Tinubu says the court had done justice to all issues put up for consideration in the petitions on the merits of the law without fear or favor. He adds that the judgment has also laid to rest agitations trailing the outcome of the keenly contested February poll.
I've started from day one to work hard, regardless of, the court cases, okay? And just strengthen my resolve to do more. A challenge of this nature and a future of this nature is more work and more hard work, more dedication. Just appeal to the sense of patriotism of Nigeria to have a change of mindset. Let us be positive about our country, be ready to contribute in all ways possible. There's no promise of El Dorado from day one. We're all in this boat of diversity, a member of the same family, living in the same house, but staying in different rooms. And it is important that we recognize that we have no other country but this one. So we better be committed to it, not for the sake of our own self-aggrandizement. Our commitment to the values, the creed of dedication, patriotism, and commitment to the value of this country. It is extremely important that we have a change of mindset for the sake of our country. Not for us, but for our children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, the inheritors of tomorrow.
The United States and Saudi Arabia say they will resume talks in Jeddah aimed at achieving a ceasefire in Sudan. Reports say representatives of Sudan's army and paramilitary rapid support forces, the RSF, have arrived in Saudi port city for the talks. Previous peace talks in Jeddah City collapsed in June after numerous ceasefire violations. This latest mediation efforts is expected to include an African facilitator from the Regional Development Bloc, IGAD. 6 months of the conflict between the Sudanese army and the RSF has created a humanitarian catastrophe with more than 9,000 people killed and about 6 million others displaced. Meanwhile, families bearing the brunt of the war in Sudan have been fleeing and arriving in remote parts of northern South Sudan, where humanitarian agencies are struggling to provide emergency aid. With no end to violence in sight, many people are now seeking safety and to continue to arrive in neighboring countries, including the Central African Republic, Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, and others have self-relocated within Sudan.
29-year-old Juma Achol Mut fled her home in Bentiu, South Sudan in 2016 following brutal violence that left her traumatized. She first fled to a refugee camp in Ethiopia's Gambela region and later moved to Sudan, where she hoped to rebuild her life. But when conflict broke out in Sudan in April, she escaped with her family across the border to South Sudan. More people are fleeing violence in Sudan and crossing into neighboring South Sudan at the Jordan border point in Upper Nile State.
I never wanted to come back home to South Sudan because of the way we left in 2016. It was a terrible memory that still comes to my mind. I was in Bentiu when the war broke out. We had to walk 14 kilometers from Bentiu to Gambela to find safety. We later settled in Sudan.
The rainy season and a lack of donor funding have hampered efforts to help people move away from the border, worsening the humanitarian situation at the increasingly overcrowded transit center in the border town of Renk. The influx of South Sudanese returnees and refugees from Sudan is putting pressure on the limited resources of a country recovering from a protracted civil war and the devastating impacts of climate change. Lack of funding, poor access and inadequate infrastructure are also making it extremely challenging for aid agencies to respond to the emergency.
The funding level has been small, that we could have all these items. So whatever little we are trying to prioritize, basically trying to target those who are more vulnerable to be supported first and then others.
UNHCR teams with partners are at border crossing points in South Sudan to monitor and help new arrivals, mainly South Sudanese refugees who are returning.
Our main role as UNHCR here is to manage the transit center, to ensure that refugees and returnees coming from Sudan have access to water, clean water. They have access to food. They also have available sanitary facilities, including core relief items when they just arrive.
UNHCR is also helping families establish contact with their relatives inside South Sudan so they can be reunited. Juma plans to make her way back to Gambela, where she hopes her children will also be able to go back to school and continue learning as the family rebuilds.
And joining us now is Michael Attah, VOA's stringer in Khartoum, for more on this. Hello, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa. What more can you tell us about the latest peace talks put together by the US and, of course, Saudi Arabia? Because this is not the first time this is happening, right?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yes, this is not the first time. There have been several rounds of peace talks that have been going on since the war broke out, through May and up to June. But for some reason, these talks just was suspended, and the two sides were, left engaging in the fighting. Even the fighting is spread now from the capital, Khartoum, to other states, more particularly in the Darfur region. So this round of talks is very important, as the two warring parties also seems to be exhausted of fighting. We have seen a lot of destruction on the infrastructure. We have seen a lot of thousands of people being displaced and also those who are killed. and which, brought up a lot of catastrophic on humanitarian situation. So I believe the two Sudanese warring parties are going this time around to Jeddah with a hope, with a little glimpse of hope that they are able to give some compromise for the sake of humanitarian situation and to end this senseless war, as many Sudanese are saying.
If we recall, the previous talks in Jeddah city actually collapsed back in June this year after numerous ceasefire violations. We also understand that this is expected to include an African facilitator from the regional development bloc. Is it expected to make any difference?
Yes, the African context is needed in Jeddah, given the situation of Sudan being an African country, and both the warring parties are also regarded as African as well as the Arabs on the other side. So the Saudi Arabia and the U.S. government is trying to onboard the African context to look at the other circumstances that the Arabs or the Western world are not aware of. So the presence of the African Union and the presence of the East African IGAD is very vital this time around. And even though given the previous situation where the African Union and the IGAD trying also to give some solutions on the table, some parties also in Sudan declined this solution. They raised a concern about to chair the committee. So, namely, they rejected the chairmanship of Kenya, accusing the Kenyan President William Ruto of being biased or being, allied to the RSF. So, I believe the African context is very important at this time, and it's also going to give some more flavor and more solution to the Sudanese problems.
It's also been 6 months of conflict between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces. What are the mediators, that's the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, hoping to achieve with yet another shot at peace in Sudan?
The main slogan that both Saudi Arabia and the American government is raising is a concern of humanitarian situation. The humanitarian situation has deteriorated over the past 6 months, and if you talk of the latest 3 months as well, from June or from July up to now, it has even gone worse. So they are concerned about the humanitarian situation. They wanted war to stop, the fighting to stop. They wanted both warring parties to silence the gun. So they are able, humanitarian aid agencies are able to safely arrive and reach people who are. This is tools that the Saudi Arabia and also the table that we need access to humanitarian agency to access people who are in need, because as a result of the fighting, a lot of humanitarian disasters are taking place due to the intensified fighting as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Michael. That's it. VOA's Stringer in Khartoum. Thank you very much for your contribution on Network Africa. Welcome back. The Israeli government says the 2 Tanzanians and a South African are among the 224 hostages being held by Hamas after the October 7th attack in Israel. However, none of the 3 Africans have been named. The Tanzanian authorities had previously confirmed that 2 of its citizens were missing, and one of them, an agriculture student in kibbutz, was targeted. South Africa is yet to comment on the report that one of its citizens is among the hostages. But Israel says that foreigners from 25 countries in all are being held by Hamas, and the foreigners make up 135 of the 224 people kidnapped. They were taken when militants from Hamas, which Israel, the UK, the US and other powers class as a terrorist organization, crossed into Israel from Gaza, killing at least 1,400 people, mostly Israelis. Israel has since retaliated with airstrikes on Gaza, which the Hamas-run health ministry says have killed almost 6,500 people. A Kenyan MP has been ordered to remove a traditional Palestinian scarf he was wearing during parliamentary proceedings. Farah Malim said he was wearing the scarf in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza amid the fighting between Israel and Hamas. He said Palestine needs support of everybody in Kenya. But the Speaker of the National Assembly ordered the MP to remove the scarf, saying the government violated parliamentary rules. Fellow MPs also condemned the legislator for disrespecting the House rules. This is coming just few days after the Kenyan police briefly detained 3 people for participating in a pro-Palestinian meeting in the capital, Nairobi. President William Ruto has expressed his government's full support for Israel in the ongoing conflict. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi says that he believes the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza will not provide a solution to the ongoing conflict with Israel. Speaking at a joint press conference with the French President Emmanuel Macron, al-Sisi said that 2 states discussed the issue of displacement. Both leaders then agreed that any move to displace Gazans into Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, a move he had previously warned that Egypt will not bear, will be extremely dangerous. The 2 men also agreed to work to contain the crisis and prevent other actors from entering the fray. Away from that now, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says that Ethiopia will not invade any neighboring nation after his recent comments on a need for his country to own a sea outlet created disquiet in that region. But addressing the nation at a square in the capital, Addis Ababa, to mark Army Day, Mr. Abiy said that Ethiopia will never invade any country, adding that the army has never initiated any attack and now will not attack anyone. This is coming a few days after Mr. Abiy told legislators that securing a sea outlet was a matter of existence for his country. Ethiopia became landlocked following Eritrea's secession in 1993 and has since dependent on Djibouti for over 85% of its import and its exports. Ethiopia and Eritrea fought a 2-year border war between 1998 and 2000. Tensions were eased between both countries back in 2018 when Mr. Abiy and President Isaias of Eritrea signed a peace agreement. Authorities in the province in the Democratic Republic of Congo have recovered 10 more bodies from a boat accident that has killed about 54, and the death toll is still rising. According to Health and Humanitarian Affairs Ministry of the province, 267 people were rescued. About 50 people were believed to still be missing, although the passenger manifest could not be retrieved as the boat owner also drowned. The accident happened in the early hours of Sunday when a wooden vessel sank in the Lulanga River in western DR Congo. This is the second deadly boat accident to happen in the country this month. In Zimbabwe, main opposition leader Nelson Chamisa says that his party will not participate in what he has described as criminal by-elections to fill 15 seats for members who were controversially recalled from parliament. The seats were left vacant after a man who declared himself as the Citizen Coalition for Change, the party's interim secretary general, said the MPs were no longer members. Consequently, by-elections have been scheduled for 9th of December after the parliamentary speaker declared the seats vacant earlier this month. Mr. Chamisa dismissed the recalling of the lawmakers, saying that Sengezo Shabangu, who's the self-declared secretary general of the party, is an imposter. A case challenging the recall of the MPs will be heard on November the 2nd. In the meantime, Zimbabwe's anti-sanctions movement has urged the international community to provide its support in addressing what it considers unjust closures of bank accounts and the implementation of illegal sanctions on Zimbabweans. In a recent statement, they highlighted the need for changes in the laws across Africa to ensure that access to bank accounts becomes a fundamental right. The movement handed over a referendum to the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria. A South Africa correspondent, Innocent Samosa, has more.
Yes, since 2019, SADC leaders have commemorated October 25 as Anti-Sanctions Day to protest against the long-standing restrictions on trade and commerce with Zimbabwe imposed by the United States of America. The Zimbabwean anti-sanctions members delivered a memorandum of grievances to the United States Embassy in Pretoria. And this is the message for America.
Therefore, the people in Zimbabwe, because of the sufferings of the sanctions, are spilling over into South Africa. And what is happening now in South Africa, a conglomeration of everybody fighting for the little economy that we have in South Africa. So we are saying to America, stop those illegal sanctions now.
Well, today is about exposing the criminality of unilateral sanctions. Sanctions should be something that if it's garnered by a world body, it's one thing. But for the U.S. to unilaterally place sanctions on countries, not only in this case that we're dealing with here in terms of Zimbabwe, but also a range of other countries.
Some commentators says the ruling ZANU-PF can do better in managing trade in the country.
So it is a fallacy that Zimbabwe is unable to trade internationally because of the sanctions. What has happened with the export of gold and the appointment of shady people, including so-called prophets, is that the government intended and successfully created parallel financial systems.
The World Bank's board has approved a loan to South Africa, borrowing the nation $1 billion to help the country resolve its energy crisis as it battles with its worst ever power cuts. There have been power outages since 2007, but they have escalated in recent years, causing blackouts of up to 16 hours a day. According to the World Bank, the frequent power cuts have severely impacted South Africa's economy, slowing its GDP growth. In a statement on Wednesday, the bank says the loan endorses a significant and strategic response to South Africa's ongoing energy crisis and the country's goal of transitioning to a just and low-carbon economy. More than 80% of South Africa's electricity is generated by burning coal. As a result, the country is ranked as the world's 14th largest emitter of carbon dioxide. The loan is expected to allow South Africa reform the country's state-owned power company, Eskom, which has now more than $26 billion of debt. More than 100 miners who had been underground for about 4 days amid a standoff between rival South African labor unions have returned to the surface. The miners were underground as a standoff over union representation at Gold One's Modder East mine in Springs. But Gold One and the National Union of Mine Workers say that over 500 workers were held hostage by members of the rival Association of Mine Workers and the Construction Union when their shift ended on Monday, October the 23rd. AMCU says that it denies the workers were being held hostage, saying they were staging a sit-in underground to push the association's recognition as the majority union at the mine. South Africa is the world's biggest producer of platinum and chrome and is a leading producer of gold and diamonds. But the industry has been shrinking for years now as ore grades decline and output has been disrupted in 2020 when COVID-19 lockdown impacted operations there.
Delighted that all our members came from the underground
no injuries, as much as they were making false allegations to say workers are being held hostage. It's a clear sign that is not true.
Well, most of us, it came as a shock that we thought we came to push a shift, and then in the morning, maybe if it's gonna be strike, we'll strike on surface. But then it turns out it was a shutdown.
While it's a bit of both, it was a hostage in the interest of labor matters.
And that's Network Africa for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Anne Nwawadu.